I didn't plan it, all right? I'm not some kind of creep, I'm just observant. I like watching people, noticing their quirks, little things that most people miss. You start to feel invisible when you spend enough time alone out here in the woods. No one's ever around to see you. So, yeah, I'm not going to lie. I got a bit too close to her, but it wasn't anything weird, just curiosity, I swear. It was around midday when I saw her coming up the trail, just some woman enjoying her day off, headphones in, not a care in the world. She didn't even notice me, just walked right past me, barely even a glance. I nodded just to be friendly, but she kept her head down. Didn't even bother to say hello. I was trying to be polite, you know? I don't know what got into me after that, but I couldn't help myself. I just wanted to see where she was going. Maybe if she'd looked up, smiled, given a little nod back, I would have carried on my way, but something about the way she ignored me, it made me curious. She didn't even give me a second thought. Like I was a ghost. She carried on up the path, and I waited a minute or two before I followed. The woods were thick there, so I could move through the trees without her seeing. She wouldn't notice anything. She had those stupid headphones in, probably blasting music, oblivious to the world. You're not supposed to do that, you know, especially not out here. You're supposed to stay alert. After a few minutes, I stepped on a stick. It cracked loud. I knew it would get her attention, and sure enough, she stopped dead in her tracks, looked over her shoulder. For a moment, I thought she'd spotted me, but she didn't. I froze, crouched low, and waited. She turned back around and kept walking, but I could tell she was a bit jumpy now, glancing back every few steps. Good. Maybe she'd finally realized she wasn't alone. I waited until she was a few paces ahead, and then I followed her again. My footsteps were barely making a sound as I moved from one tree to the next. But she kept looking back, kept stopping and listening like some kind of prey that just sensed a predator nearby. The thought of that, it thrilled me a little. She was nervous, finally aware of something other than herself. But then she must have realized what was going on. She started walking faster, nearly tripping over rocks and roots, glancing back over her shoulder, probably wondering if I was still behind her. I could see her whole body tense up, shoulders tight, and that's when I knew I was getting to her. She felt it. After a while, she broke into a run. She wasn't very fast, she wasn't prepared for it. You could tell she wasn't used to running for long, but I jogged after her, staying just close enough so she could hear my footsteps, see me if she glanced back. She had no clue where she was going, just bolting down the path like a rabbit. The adrenaline was kicking in for me too, and it felt exciting, like a hunt. She finally ducked off the trail, hiding somewhere in the thick of the woods, just out of sight. Smart girl, I thought. I waited a moment, then walked slowly down the trail, making just enough noise to keep her alert, to let her know I was still there. Every so often, I'd stop, stand still, listen, but I couldn't hear her anymore. She was quiet. I have to give her that. She was good at hiding. But I wasn't giving up just yet. I circled the area, moving slow, waiting for her to panic, to make a sound. I wanted to hear her, to know she hadn't gotten away just yet. I don't know how long I looked, but after a while I realized I'd lost her. I stood there, still listening, but it was just the sound of the trees, the wind. She was gone. I was just about to give up when I heard a branch snap in the distance. My chest tightened and I realized I'd almost forgotten to breathe. There she was, close, maybe 10 paces off, hiding behind a fallen tree. I walked over slowly, my boots crunching on the dead leaves, making sure she could hear me coming, and then, just as I got close, she bolted. I didn't even have time to react before she was back on the trail, running full speed, disappearing around the bend. It was over in seconds, and I knew then that I'd lost her. She wasn't coming back. Not willingly, anyway, I'll admit. Something snapped in me then. I let out a scream, loud, frustrated, letting it echo through the trees, hoping she'd hear it wherever she was hiding. Let her be afraid. Let her hear that I was still out there, angry that she got away. She's probably telling people some story now, saying she was chased through the woods by some maniac, playing the victim. But the truth is, she's the one who started it. She's the one who made me feel invisible. And next time, I'll make sure I don't lose her. So I've just come back from what should have been a nice, relaxing holiday. I'd booked an Airbnb in this small coastal town, just wanting to get away for a bit. And it was a cute little place, top floor of an old building with a view of the sea and all these vintage furnishings. The owner seemed decent enough when I arrived. He gave me a little tour, showing me how to work the boiler and where things were, handed over the keys and left. Everything seemed normal. The first few days were amazing. I'd sleep in, stroll down to the beach, grab coffee at a local cafe. The town was quiet and the place itself was pretty comfortable. But then, on the fourth day, I had a bit of an accident. I was making myself a cup of tea in the kitchen when I slipped. The floor had gotten kind of slick, probably from steam or spilled water, and I twisted my ankle. Not badly, but enough that it hurt to walk on it. I hobbled around for the rest of the day, just taking it easy. Later that afternoon, I decided to head out to a cafe nearby and sit outside, get some fresh air. As I was sitting there, who should walk by but the Airbnb owner? He saw me, waved, then came over to say hello, and then he says, "Oh, how's the ankle? The kitchen floor can get a bit slippy." I just stared at him. I hadn't told anyone about my ankle, not a soul. And the more I thought about it, the more unsettling it felt. I hadn't texted him about the fall, didn't put it in a message. There's just no way he should have known. He looked kind of startled himself after he said it, muttered something about the weather, and then made this awkward exit, practically speeding off down the street. When I got back to the flat, I couldn't ignore this feeling, so I started looking around. I know it sounds paranoid, but I'd never felt more like I was being watched. I pulled out my phone and tried to Google how to spot hidden cameras. People say to check smoke detectors, mirrors, vents, places you wouldn't usually look. I started in the kitchen, and sure enough, right above the cupboard was a small, out-of-place hole in the smoke detector. I squinted up at it, and yep, there was a tiny, barely noticeable lens behind it. My heart started pounding as I moved into the bedroom. Sure enough, in the bedside lamp, tucked beneath the lampshade, was another tiny camera. Same in the bathroom mirror and the living room clock. Every room had a camera. Every single one. I felt sick. At that point, I just grabbed my stuff and bolted. I didn't care about getting a refund or dealing with the owner. I just needed to get out of there. I found a hotel nearby and locked myself in for the night, barely sleeping. I kept checking the room over and over, paranoid there'd be more cameras, but at least this place felt safe. I reported the listing to Airbnb the next morning, but they were frustratingly slow to respond. They took the listing down eventually, but last I checked, it's back up again under a slightly different name. I don't know what happened with the owner, and honestly, I don't want to know. I've felt creeped out for days, knowing someone was watching me in every single private moment, like I was living on display without even knowing it. I keep thinking back to that slip in the kitchen and how easily it could have gone worse. Makes me wonder just how much of me he's got recorded. And more than anything, I wonder how many people have stayed in that flat without ever realizing. I was hired to help, and that's exactly what I did. Being a live-in nanny is a strange thing, especially when the family starts feeling more like your own. I mean, you're there all the time, caring for these little ones, feeding them, dressing them, drying their tears. For those of you who've never done it, it's impossible to explain the bond that forms. From the moment I arrived, it was clear the mother wasn't attentive. I'd seen her types before. She was always rushing off to her meetings or lunches, some excuse to get away from her own kids. She had no idea how much they needed her. She was just absent, a figure they'd see for dinner or before bed. But when I was there, they had consistency. I gave them stability. The kids would cling to me when they were upset, call for me in the middle of the night instead of her. She barely noticed. She was too busy with her life outside of them, leaving everything to me. Soon enough, I felt like I was the one raising them, the one they depended on, the one who loved them. They were mine. Sometimes, after I'd put them to bed, I'd wander into her room. She had all these beautiful clothes, so many things she never wore, things she probably didn't even remember she owned. One night, on a whim, I tried on one of her dresses. It was a bit long on me, but the fabric felt soft and warm. I looked at myself in the mirror, imagined for a moment that I was the one who belonged there, the kids' real mother, the one who'd never leave them. After that, I'd wear her things every now and then. Nothing noticeable, just her scarves or a blouse. But the kids noticed. They'd say, "Mummy wears that shirt," or "Mummy has that dress," and they'd smile, even laugh. They were seeing what I wanted them to see, what I felt, that I was more of a mother to them than she ever was. Everything changed. I dressed up for the morning school run, wearing a dress of hers I'd found in the back of her wardrobe. I thought it was tasteful, understated. The kids were laughing, saying I looked like Mummy, and for once I felt like I could actually be her. But when she came down the stairs and saw us, the look on her face, it was like I'd committed some awful crime. She didn't say much, but her eyes were cold. She just stared, like I was some stranger who'd snuck into her home. The next day she called me into the kitchen, told me that things weren't working out, and that she didn't need my services anymore. She didn't even let me say goodbye to the kids, didn't give me a chance to explain. She just threw me out like I was nothing. I'll admit, I was heartbroken. I'd lost everything, my family, my home, my life's purpose. But worst of all, I'd lost the kids. I lay awake for nights, wondering if they missed me, if they were scared without me there. They needed me, I knew they did. She was making a mistake. So I watched. I'd wait near their house just to catch glimpses of them, see that they were all right. And she was well, she was still herself, leaving the nanny, the new nanny, to do all the work just like before. She'd be off in her car while the nanny took them to school or out to the park. It was pathetic. How could she replace me so easily? Did she even care that I'd been there, that I'd loved them? One evening I caught sight of them in town. They were out for dinner, and the kids looked sad, barely touching their food. The mother didn't seem to notice, busy on her phone as usual. The sight of it broke my heart. I was the one who loved them, who knew them better than anyone, and I realized, standing there in the street, that I couldn't just leave them. I had to make things right. A few nights later, I went back to the house. It was easy enough to sneak in through the side gate. I still remembered the code. I made my way to the kids' bedroom just to see them, to let them know I hadn't abandoned them like she had. They were fast asleep, so peaceful, looking just like they did when I'd sing them lullabies. I sat down on the edge of the bed, stroked their hair. I whispered to them that I was there, that I'd come back for them. One of them stirred, his little hand reaching up and touching mine in his sleep, and I swear I felt whole again just for that moment. I'd just stood up when I heard her, the mother. She was at the door, staring at me with this wild look in her eyes. She screamed, demanded to know what I was doing, but I didn't flinch. I calmly told her that I was just checking on them, making sure they were safe. She didn't understand. She never understood. She called the police, of course, said I'd broken in, that I was unstable. But I know the truth, and so do the kids. I was the one who was there for them, who loved them when she couldn't be bothered. And no matter what she says, no matter what the police say, I'll always be their real mother. She'll see. I don't expect anyone here to understand, but maybe some of you will get it if you've ever seen someone you felt this deep connection with, even if they didn't realize it at first. That's how it was with her. I was just doing my job, cleaning up the library after hours, putting chairs back in place, emptying bins, the usual, but I started seeing her there. Always the last to leave, lights off around her, hunched over her books, headphones in. She was dedicated, I'll give her that. And smart too. You could just tell by how focused she was. It was just a passing interest at first. I'd look at her more than usual as I went about my rounds, noticing the little things. How she'd leave her pen tapping on her notebook while she thought, the way she'd tuck her hair back when it fell forward, her focused little frown. But then, one night she forgot her water bottle, left it right there on the table by the stacks. I thought she might come back for it, so I waited a while, and when she didn't, I decided to keep it, just until I could give it back to her, of course. Over the next few weeks, she kept leaving things behind. Pens, papers, sometimes a hair tie. I thought of it as, well, almost like she was leaving them for me, like she wanted me to remember her. I started keeping her things, holding on to each little piece like a part of her. I even set them up in my flat, right where I could see them when I got home from work, a little reminder, like she was close even when I was alone. I also realized there were other ways I could get to know her better. My job gave me access to the CCTV cameras all over the campus, so I'd check the cameras just to see where she was during the day. Nothing weird, just curiosity. But it turned into this routine. I'd watch her walk across the quad, sit by the fountain with her books, or head into the cafe by herself. I'd follow her path on the cameras, keep track of her. Soon I knew her schedule. I could predict exactly where she'd be any time of day. I'd even take my breaks to be around those spots, sometimes just catching a glimpse just to be close. That was when I found out about the boyfriend. He'd meet her after her late nights, sometimes take her for coffee or walk her home. And the way she'd smile at him like he was the only one in the world, it felt like a punch in the gut every time. It didn't make sense. We were the ones who understood each other. We were the ones who belonged together. I'd spent months learning everything about her. She'd left all those things for me. He didn't see her, not like I did, so one night I waited for her after the library closed. I knew her routine, knew she'd be walking out alone that evening. And when I saw her, I walked up just like any other person and said her name. She looked up, surprised, probably because she didn't even know I knew her name. I knew everything about her by now. And then I told her I'd been watching out for her all these weeks. How I knew we were meant to be together, how she'd been leaving me all those little signs, all those small pieces of herself, but she just looked at me confused, like I was some stranger. Then she said something about how she appreciated it, but that I didn't know her. It stung, that rejection. All this time I'd been right there, and she was acting like I was just some background extra in her life. When I mentioned her boyfriend, she stepped back, eyes wide, like she was scared of me. She started fumbling for her phone, maybe to call someone, and something inside me snapped. I just couldn't let her leave thinking I was just nobody. I won't get into the details of how things ended, because that's not important. What matters is that she'll remember me now. You could say I'm the guy who keeps the building running smoothly. I handle the plumbing, fix the lights, change out the fire alarms, and if there's an issue, I'm the first call. I know the place inside out, and yeah, maybe I notice who comes and goes. It's hard not to. She'd only just moved in. Top floor, corner flat, just her and her little boy. I couldn't help but notice her. She's young, beautiful, and there's this air about her, like she's always a bit worn down, but still holding it together. I saw her struggling with her boxes that first day, and I offered a hand. She gave me this shy smile, thanked me. For a while, that was it, but she seemed to have trouble with things in her flat now and again. Her radiator needed bleeding. One of her windows wasn't latching properly. I was more than happy to help. Just a quick knock, let myself in with her permission, a polite exchange, and that was it. But I started to feel like I understood her. She was always running around taking care of her kid, juggling so much. I have access to the CCTV cameras in the building for maintenance and security reasons, and I'd find myself from time to time just checking in, just to make sure she got home safe after her evening shifts. Just to make sure nobody bothered her on her way up to her flat. I'd see her walk through the lobby, looking worn out, or stopping to tie her little boy's shoe in the hallway. There's something so peaceful about watching her. One day she left for work and her boy was off with his dad for the weekend. I had the building keys, and before I knew it, I was standing at her door, just looking around, maybe making sure everything was in order, that she'd locked up properly. I was helping her, really. I let myself in, and I'll admit my heart was racing. Her flat was neat but lived in. Photos of her and her son, bits and pieces on the counters, her jacket tossed on the chair like she'd just left. I felt closer to her, being in her space. I couldn't help it. I wandered into her bedroom. Her bed was unmade, a blanket thrown across it. It just looked so comforting. And yeah, I lay down just to rest a moment. I could smell her perfume on the sheets, faint but there. It was like she was right next to me. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I know, there's this sharp, piercing scream. I bolted up, and there she was, standing in the doorway, horror in her eyes. She looked at me like I was some monster. I couldn't even find the words to explain myself. She kept screaming, telling me to get out. I tried to say something, anything to calm her down, but nothing came out. I'm not even sure how I left. Her face, that scream, it stuck with me. I just wanted to keep her safe, to feel close to her. It all started out like any other normal day in uni. You know how it is. Lectures, tutorials, and an endless blur of faces in a class of over 100 students. You don't know everyone, you don't try to know everyone. So when people from class send follow requests on Instagram, you just hit accept and move on. No big deal. This one guy, I hadn't even noticed him before he requested to follow me. He sat at the back, apparently. I figured he was probably just one of those quiet students blending in. The day after I accepted his follow, he started liking my posts, not just the recent ones, but all of them. He even left comments like, "Nice pic" and "Great shot" on pictures from months and years back. It was weird. Then he messaged me just a quick "Hey," and later, "I'm in your class, BTW. Want to get coffee sometime?" I barely knew him and wasn't interested, so I let him down gently. I replied saying thanks but no thanks. I thought that was the end of it. But the messages didn't stop. The first time I felt truly uneasy was when I posted a story from a coffee shop I'd gone to with friends. Within 15 minutes, he showed up. He sat at a table near ours. He didn't order anything, he just sat. He didn't say a word, just stayed there, and his eyes locked on me. I quickly left, and even my friends noticed something was up. Then it became a pattern. Every time I'd post from campus or a nearby cafe, he'd appear. At first, he'd sit from a distance, maybe watching, maybe not, but then he'd walk by and look over, as if to say, I know you're here and I'm here too. One day, I even saw him at my gym. He was just standing outside when I finished, scrolling on his phone. The breaking point came when I received a DM from him that said, "You look so peaceful when you're reading in the library. I feel like I know you more than anyone else does." I hadn't posted anything about being in the library that day, but he'd clearly been watching me. I blocked him after that, but it didn't stop him. He made another account and sent a follow request, this time using a fake name and profile picture. He started showing up in other classes I had, where he definitely wasn't enrolled, sitting at the back with that same stare. Eventually, I had to report him to campus security. They said they'd look into it, but nothing seemed to change. Working late-night security at the mall can be boring, but seeing her around was like a bright spot in my shift. She wasn't like the others, you know? She had this peaceful look, like she was just lost in her own world. And she came by almost every evening, browsing the shops. It didn't take long before I'd catch myself watching her on the monitors, just making sure she was okay. I am a security guard after all. This is my job. I'm here to protect her. But one night, I noticed this guy approaching her in one of the quieter parts of the mall. He seemed eager, I didn't like it one bit. She was polite, smiling and nodding, letting him go on and on. I knew she didn't want him there. When she left, he followed. I started feeling this panic rising, this strange urgency to step in, so I left my post and started tracking him through the cameras. It wasn't long before he tried to chat her up again near the parking lot exit. I was only watching out for her, making sure she got to her car without hassle. The next day, when I saw him again in the food court, sitting close to her, I couldn't hold back. I went up to him, said something like, "She's got a boyfriend, you know." He looked at me all confused, but I just stared him down until he got up and left. The way he looked at me, though, like I was the one in the wrong, it's laughable, isn't it? People like him don't understand, but I did. That night, I watched her leave, like I always did, making sure she was safe. But just when I thought she was, she turned around and saw me. Her eyes went wide, and she looked scared, like I was some kind of monster. She mumbled something about not needing any help, but I was there to make sure she got home safely, that no one else would try anything. She didn't show up the next night, or the night after. I checked the security logs, the parking records, the cameras. Nothing. The manager called me in a few days later to tell me I wasn't needed anymore. Something about complaints. Who would complain about me? You don't really get it until it happens to you. That instant spark when you meet someone and you know they're exactly the person you've been waiting for. That was her. Picked her up for a short trip. Nothing special really, but she was radiant. I knew she could feel it too. She was polite at first, and I figured she'd appreciate a bit of chat, so I started asking questions, the usual. "Where are you from? What do you do?" Just harmless conversation. She laughed a few times, even smiled when she told me about her favorite places in town. I could tell she was just a bit shy, so I went ahead and asked her out. Couldn't miss a chance like that, right? And that's when she just shut me down, like she hadn't been laughing, like she didn't care at all. "Sorry, not interested," she said, all cold, like I'd done something wrong. The nerve, after everything we just shared. I didn't believe it for a second. I figured she just needed to warm up to understand I wasn't some creep, so I kept driving, made a quick turn, and I saw her expression change. She started looking nervous, asking me where we were going, telling me to pull over. She even tried to grab the door handle, but she didn't get it. I wasn't about to just drop her off and let her walk out of my life. "Just give me a number," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "One drink, that's it." I thought she'd finally see sense, but no, she kept refusing, panicking even. I could feel my patience slipping. Why was she being so stubborn? She knew we had something. So I told her I wouldn't stop until I got that number. She was shaking, practically crying, but eventually she gave in. She gave me the number and scrambled out as soon as I pulled over. It was like she couldn't get away fast enough. But when I called, nothing, a fake number. She actually gave me a fake number after all that. Guess I'll just have to try again tomorrow. I know what you're probably thinking, but this is harmless. Just hear me out. So, there's this girl at the supermarket. I see her every evening when I pop by after work. I didn't think much of it at first, but over time something just clicked. It's her smile. The way she says, "Have a nice night," as if she actually means it, even at the end of a long day, makes you feel seen, you know? Makes you feel like you matter. I started making sure I'd go around the same time each night. I'd only buy a few things each time: milk, crisps, some dinner. Didn't want her to think I was some slob buying junk food for no reason. The goal was always the same: a little chat, a "hey, how's it going?" and a look into those eyes. We had a connection. She didn't really know me yet, but I could tell it was only a matter of time. Eventually I got up the nerve to wait for her after her shift, just in the car park. I kept my distance, didn't want to spook her or anything. I just watched, making sure she was safe as she walked to her car. One time her hair came loose from a ponytail in the wind, and she looked so lovely, just so pure. I left a small gift on her car that night, a note that just said, "To brighten your day." No name, no pressure, and just something to let her know she was special. She probably thought it was sweet. She might even have told her friends about it. But over time, I noticed she seemed more tired, distracted, wasn't smiling as much. I started seeing the bags under her eyes. I thought maybe she's got something weighing her down and she just needs someone to talk to. So I carried on keeping an eye on her, watching her after work, and finally I thought maybe I'd drop by her place, make sure she's all right. That's when I realized she kept her house key in her bag, in this little pocket that was always open. It wouldn't hurt to borrow it for a bit, I figured. I just wanted a quick look, just to see what her world was like, to understand her a bit more. So I found her place, went inside, and wow, it was like I could feel her there, like I was sharing her space. Her clothes were in the laundry basket. She had her favorite coffee on the counter, all those little details you don't get to see in the shop. She didn't know I was there, of course. I'm not an idiot. I was careful, made sure to lock up when I left. But since then, I feel like she's been different. She's jumpy, a bit less friendly at the till. I wanted to reassure her, show her it was okay, so I left another note on her car last night. This time I wrote, "Don't be scared, I'm here for you." I don't know why, but she's been acting like she's afraid. Maybe she just doesn't get it yet. But that's fine. Love takes time, doesn't it? All right, so maybe I'd had one too many that night, but come on, everyone does on a Friday, right? I'd been out with a few mates, and after a couple rounds I spotted her. She was stunning, blonde, wearing this classy white dress, clearly the center of attention with her group of friends, all glammed up and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. She must have been on a hen do. The sash and tiara gave it away, but still, I couldn't help myself. I mean, the girl had to be taken, getting married and all, but she looked at me when I first walked past, just for a second, and that second, I felt something, so I figured, what's the harm in saying hello? I walked up and introduced myself, tried to make her laugh. I know I was a bit tipsy, and maybe I was slurring a bit, but she didn't have to be so cold. She just kind of looked away, made a little joke to her friends, and turned her back on me. I thought maybe she's shy, maybe her mates are giving her a hard time, so I stayed around, watching her a bit, figuring I'd try again later. Over the next hour I kept my eye on her, not in a creepy way or anything, just, waiting for the right moment. She was dancing with her friends, smiling. Every time she laughed, I knew we had something, even if she didn't realize it yet. I tried dancing near her once or twice, just to make it casual, but she kept turning away like she was avoiding me. Her friends noticed too, and I heard one of them mutter something to her. They glanced my way, probably jealous she'd gotten my attention. As the night wore on, her group moved from club to club. It felt like a game of chase, almost. I wasn't giving up. I wanted her to see that I was serious, that I was interested. I mean, most blokes would have given up, but that's what made me different. I followed her from place to place, hoping she'd finally just stop and talk. But every time I tried, she'd disappear into the crowd like she was purposely making it hard. It was around closing time, and I was starting to feel knackered. She and her friends finally stumbled out of the last bar, laughing and calling a taxi. She spotted me then, properly saw me standing across the street watching. I saw her expression change, like she was scared or something. I mean, she could have just said hi, had a chat, but no. She gave me this look like I was some kind of monster. She clung to her friend's arm, hurrying to the cab, practically running to get inside. I walked towards her, tried to explain, but she was already in the taxi, locking the door. She looked out the window, just staring. The cab pulled away, and she was gone, just like that. I don't get why she reacted like that. I was only trying to be friendly, but hey, maybe next time she'll remember me. I went camping solo this past weekend. Just me, my tent, and the peace of the woods. I've always found camping to be a good way to clear my head, and after a messy breakup, I needed it more than ever, just some quiet, away from everything. The first night out there was perfect at first. I had a little fire going, made myself some instant noodles, just chilling under the stars. But around midnight, I started to have this weird gut feeling that I weren't alone. I heard footsteps. Slow, coming from somewhere just beyond in the woods, though I couldn't see anything. I hoped it was just a deer or some other animal, but then I heard sticks breaking, crunching underfoot like someone was circling my campsite. I called out, shone my flashlight, but the noises stopped. After being on edge, but not hearing anything for a while, I turned in for the night, a bit spooked, but trying not to let it get to me. I must have fallen asleep fast, because next thing I know, I'm waking up, groggy as hell. It felt like I had been sleeping out in the open all night. I was frozen cold. I rolled over bleary-eyed, reaching for my flask, when I noticed someone else was there. Lying right next to me, close enough that I could feel their breath. I froze. It took me a second, but then I saw who it was. My ex, the last person I'd expected or wanted to see. She was just lying there, looking like she'd been camping with me all along, her arm draped over me like we were still together. I could feel my stomach twist as I looked at her. We'd broken up months ago, and she hadn't taken it well. There'd been a few texts, showing up outside my flat once or twice, but this was another level. She'd followed me into the bloody woods. I felt trapped, like I was paralyzed with fear and confusion, because how long had she been here? How did she find me? I started to move, trying to edge out from under her arm, but she woke up, eyes opening, and this smile spread across her face, this calm, unsettling smile. "Good morning, baby," she whispered, like this was all perfectly normal. She started telling me how she thought a quiet weekend together would fix things, how she wanted to watch over me like she was doing me a favor by breaking into my tent. She even said she'd been out there watching me the night before, waiting for the right moment to join me. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to react. I just mumbled something about getting fresh air and scrambled out of the tent, heart racing. I grabbed my bag, pretending to go grab more wood or something, and bolted, left the tent, the fire, everything. I made it back to my car, practically sprinting the entire way. I didn't stop until I was out of the woods, locked inside with the doors shut. I haven't heard from her since, but I keep getting these texts that just say, "You didn't have to leave so soon." I know people will judge me, but I don't care. It all started a few weeks back when I was in the hospital for something minor, just a couple of nights on the ward. I was bored out of my mind, so I started walking around just to stretch my legs and pass the time. That's when I saw her. She was in one of the private rooms, hooked up to a drip, lying perfectly still. I could tell she'd been there a while, even with the dim lights and the sterile, impersonal setting. She was beautiful. I can't explain it, but something about her made me feel connected. I found myself drawn to her room, passing by several times a day, and I'd linger just long enough to see her peaceful face. It didn't take long for me to start visiting her properly. I'd bring little things, a flower from the gift shop, a get-well-soon card, sometimes a balloon just to brighten the room up a bit. I even left chocolates once, though I knew she couldn't eat them. I'd sit by her bedside, talk to her softly about life, about anything, really. She became the highlight of my days in that place. It felt like she was mine somehow, like I was her guardian. A few of the nurses gave me odd looks, but I didn't care. They probably thought I was family or something, and I wasn't about to correct them. This was my little secret. One evening, I was sitting there, holding her hand and brushing her hair back like I always did when she started to stir. At first, it was just a twitch, but then her eyes fluttered open. It took her a few moments, but eventually she looked around the room, and then her gaze landed on me. I felt like I was on cloud nine, grinning from ear to ear. I couldn't wait to see her reaction. "I hope you like everything," I said, gesturing at the flowers, the cards, the balloons. "All of this is from me." She gave me a puzzled look, blinking as if to clear her vision. "Sorry, who are you?" she asked in a weak, hoarse voice. The way she said it, like I was a stranger, someone she'd never seen before, felt like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe it. I'd been there every day, talking to her, keeping her company, caring for her, and she had no idea who I was. It was like none of it mattered to her. I felt this sudden surge of anger. I started tearing the flowers apart, petals scattering all over the floor. I popped the balloons one by one, the loud bangs echoing in the small room. The look on her face turned to fear, and she tried to press the call button for the nurse, but I was out the door before anyone came. Now I know how this sounds. I know it was wrong, but it hurt. She should have known. She should have felt what I'd done for her. But she just looked at me like I was nothing. I've always heard that working the night shift can get creepy, but I thought it was just silly stories until all of this happened. I'm a petrol station attendant, working the night shift alone at a small, out-of-the-way place on the edge of town. It's usually quiet, only a handful of regulars and the occasional traveler stopping by. Mostly it's me, my coffee, and the radio for company. I never really felt uncomfortable before. This started a few months back. He was just another customer. Late 20s maybe, scruffy but nothing too out of the ordinary, dressed in old jeans and a faded jumper. He came in around 11 p.m., bought a chocolate bar and left. Didn't say much, and I didn't think much of it. People come and go, but then he came back the next night, and the night after that. At first he bought something each time, though it was always just little things like a packet of crisps or a can of cola. Sometimes he'd fill up his car, even if it didn't really seem like he needed to, but over time he started turning up without buying anything, just wandering around the aisles, occasionally looking over at me. I'd greet him like I do with everyone. Polite, nothing too friendly, just enough to acknowledge him and carry on. It wasn't long before his behavior became a bit unsettling. He'd stare for a long time, or come in, walk around and leave without buying anything at all. Sometimes he'd stand near the counter as if waiting for me to start a conversation, even though I'd just say, "Let me know if you need anything." And that was it. But each time he'd come in, his stare would last a bit longer, like he was hoping for more from me. One night, he walked up to the counter with a bottle of water. I rang it up as usual, then he didn't move. Just looked at me and said, "Do you even know my name?" I shrugged, feeling a bit weirded out, but keeping my tone casual. "Can't say I do, sorry, but if you need anything else, just let me know." The look he gave me was something between frustration and hurt, like I'd insulted him in some way. He didn't say anything else, just took his water and left. But not before glaring over his shoulder as he went out the door. From then on, it was like he was trying to make a point. He'd show up nearly every night, and each time he seemed to hang around a bit longer, always looking at me with that same annoyed expression when I treated him like any other customer. I kept thinking maybe he'd just stop if I ignored it, so I did my best to keep my distance and be professional, but it seemed to only make him angrier. One night, he turned up again bang on time at 11 p.m., and I could tell by the way he walked in that he was agitated. He paced around the store, muttering under his breath, knocking things off shelves and putting them back. I kept my eye on him, hoping he'd just buy something and go, but he didn't. Instead, he came up to the counter, and his voice was a low, tense whisper. "I thought we had a connection, but you don't even care." "Sir, if you need anything, please let me know," I said as calmly as I could. He let out this frustrated laugh, his eyes wide and unblinking. "Right, of course. You're just doing your job, aren't you? Just the polite cashier behind the counter. I'm just another customer to you." I was trying not to show any fear, but inside I was rattled. I didn't know what he wanted from me, and every response seemed to make things worse. He finally left, but the way he stormed out, muttering to himself, made me realize I might need to report it. I told my manager, and he told me to start locking up at midnight and only use the side window. A few days went by without seeing him, and I was relieved, thinking he'd finally moved on. But then, just last night, he came back, and this time it was different. He drove up around 2 a.m., and instead of coming into the store, he parked right outside and just sat there, staring at me through the glass. I tried to ignore it, but after about 15 minutes, I was getting nervous. I went back to my work, hoping he'd leave if I didn't give him attention, and that's when he got out of the car, walked to the door, and tried the handle, which was thankfully locked after hours. He knocked harder and harder, his face inches from the glass. "Let me in," he said, his voice muffled through the door. I shook my head, mouthing, "We're closed." But he just stood there, his hand smacking against the door again and again. When I didn't open, he began kicking the door, screaming, "Let me in! I'm not just some customer! You don't get it!" I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, but the whole time he was still yelling, kicking and shouting. By the time they finally picked up, he must have realized I was calling them, because he shot me one last furious look, jumped back into his car, and sped off. The cops showed up a little later, took my statement and said they'd keep an eye out, but without more details, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I call my manager to see about adding more security. We don't even have CCTV, for God's sake. Now I'm supposed to go back in tonight, but honestly, I don't know if I can do it. They think I don't know where they are. They think they can leave me behind and move on, act like I never existed, like I didn't build this family with my own two hands. But they're wrong. I know they've tried to shut me out, and maybe I've made mistakes, but I was their father and her husband. I have every right to be in their lives. Sarah acts like I'm some kind of stranger now, like I'm dangerous, but all I ever wanted was to protect them, to be close. She was the one who pushed me out. She doesn't understand. I did everything for them. I remember where they used to live, every road and path near the house, every tree in the garden. I know she's probably changed a lot, hiding in that new place, some cookie-cutter semi in a good part of town, but no matter how far she's moved, she's still got my children and no one gets to keep them from me. It took a bit of digging, but I tracked them down eventually. I've got a good sense of where they live now, which roads she takes to drop the kids off, even where she gets her coffee every morning on her way to work. Just seeing her, knowing she's still part of my life, feels right. At first, I'd just watch them from across the street as they'd walk to the car or take the rubbish out. She looked so tired, worn down, probably because raising two kids without me isn't as easy as she thought. And the kids, they look just like me. Every day I see them, it's like seeing my own reflection, and it reminds me of everything we had. They'd never understand that this is all out of love. I know they can't see that right now. I have to make it clearer, maybe remind them of all the good times we shared. So I left a few notes for Sarah, carefully hidden in her letterbox. Just little reminders that I'm still around, that I still remember all those small things she told me once, like her favorite flowers or the songs she used to hum to the kids. I hoped it would jog her memory, make her realize that no one knows her like I do. I thought she'd appreciate that, but she's ignored everyone. Last night, I left a teddy bear at their door, the same kind our daughter loved when she was a toddler. Sarah used to laugh and say she looked just like a little angel, hugging it to sleep. I pictured my daughter's face when she'd see it, that look of surprise and wonder, like she'd know her dad was still looking out for her, but instead, Sarah started acting like she's spooked. She glances over her shoulder now when she's out with the kids, and she's stopped taking her usual routes, like she's hiding. It's almost like she's ungrateful for everything I'm doing to make this right. I need to get closer to make her understand. They're still mine no matter what the court said, no matter what she's told herself. She's twisted everything, made me out to be something I'm not, but I'll win them back. They'll remember who I am, and one day they'll thank me for it. They'll come around. After all, they're my family, and family always sticks together. Always sticks.